Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Chennettée Jelleberg. I use she, her pronouns. I am the director of the Office for Student Access, and I'm presenting today with Emily Hillhouse, and I'll introduce her as well. She is the director of Student Academic Support Services. And we're here just to kind of talk about the resources we provide and how we can assist and support your learning while here at OHSU. Okay. So today we'll discuss student academic support services, the Office for Student Access, and then how can we help you all? What questions do you have? Really, this is a time to kind of engage with us a bit more and get your questions answered, hopefully a little bit faster than trying to play email tag or phone tag with us. Okay.
So, just really quickly, I have laryngitis, so if my voice cuts out, I apologize. As Shawnate said, I'm Emily Hillhouse, Director of Student Academic Support Services, and at its core, what Student Academic Support Services provides is guidance for helping students learn more effectively and efficiently. So, like breaking that down a little bit, we talk about study skills, motivation and goal setting, memorization strategies, test taking skills, test anxiety, time management. It's really a resource that helps every learner figure out where they're struggling and why, and then guides them through the many different strategies that are available to them. Next slide. So common things we have students coming to us saying are things like, I'm studying really hard, but I can't remember anything, or there's just too much information, or I don't have time to do everything. Usually students will come to us feeling very overwhelmed by everything. And so I think that a really important part of if you are thinking of reaching out for our services, or if you're supporting somebody else who is thinking of reaching out for our services, is to understand that you don't have to know why you're struggling or what kind of solution you're looking for before you come to us. You don't need to come to me saying, um, please give me a planner. I need to know how to use a planner. It can be, you can just come and go, and then we will figure it out from there, and that's totally fine. Um, Next slide. And I think a really important thing, or in terms of how we frame academic support services, is helping learners understand where they have power in their situation. Why this is important is because we tend to feel like education is something that is happening to us. It feels like we are like just swept along, like it's like people are teaching us things and we feel very passive. And the more we feel passive about our education, the worse it feels. It feels very stressful to constantly be reacting to things that are happening to us. And so a lot of what we're doing is helping students move from a place where they are just reacting, just being like, I have to do this. Oh no, wait, now you're telling me I have to do this. And like going from that very reactive place to a place where they are taking control over their learning, understanding what aspects of their learning are things that they can choose, so that they what they can choose to do about each situation. So in order to sort of get into this a little bit, we're going to do a little activity. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to be talking about the difference between approaching education in a passive reactive way to thinking about how you can look at education from an active acting way. Sorry, my brain is also not 100% yet. So what I want you to do is, if we go to the next slide, and if any of you have been to any of my workshops before, you may have run into this activity previously, but what I want you to do is to just take a minute to read this passage. Okay, so in the chat, I'd like you to put, how did that make you feel? How did you feel reading that that passage? Entirely confused. Yeah, very confused. It feels confusing. A lot of people find it quite stressful. Well, discombobulated. Also thinking about going to the beach. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide. What I'd like you to try to do is go ahead. Yeah, it makes you feel kind of dumb, right? What I want you to do is go ahead and in the chat, write down everything that you remember. Don't hit enter until I say go, but go ahead and just dump everything you remember into the chat box. And when I say go, hit enter, but not yet. So right now, just type what you know, what you remember into the chat box. Okay, hit enter. Nice. Vishnu. Yada yada. Wait a second. You will remember a lot more than I ever do. Um, so let's go ahead to the next slide. So what if I tell you that we remember more and we understand things better and we generally feel better about our studying if instead of approaching any reading or any lecture passively, if beforehand you have some context for it. In this case, it would be figuring out generally what it's about and generally how the information is structured. So if we go to the next slide, this reading was generally about kites, and how the information is structured is making kites, flying kites, and possible complications for flying kites. So what I want you to do is go ahead and read the text one more time with this in mind, that it's about flying kites and that it's organized with making kites, flying kites, and things that can go wrong, and see how that changes your experience of reading the text. So next slide. How does that feel this time? Does it feel better? Right, right, exactly. So let's go to the next slide. Let's do it one more time. See if you remember a little bit more this time. So again, put it into the chat box and then don't hit enter until I say go. Yes, that is absolutely part of it. Or another way to think of it is that in terms of memory, connections are really, really powerful. Okay, hit enter. And you're like, no, but we didn't want to do it this time. So, pardon me. So did it feel like you understood it and remembered it better this time? Exactly. And so what you just experienced is, if we can go to the next slide, is the difference between approaching a text passively versus actively. I could go into a lot of details. This isn't actually a presentation about learning strategies, but this is a learning strategy that we call previewing, which is exactly about creating a framework or context for information before you receive it, so that you're able to more actively engage with the context as you receive it. Sorry, with the content as you receive it. And all that, this is the kind of why I'm talking about it today, is that this is kind of stuff that we do as learning specialists, is help you understand that your learning doesn't, that when you approach learning very passively, emotionally, it makes you feel worse. Whereas when you are active, there are many things that you can do to increase how you're actively engaging with the material, which will emotionally feel better, but will also help you learn things much more effectively. And that's what we're here to help with. So if we can go to the next slide, this gets to the base philosophy of what we do, which is that your learning is within your control. And this is a really, really important thing to start with, because this is generally not how we think about learning. We tend to think about learning as something that we are born with, as in it is like a character trait. Like I am a good student or a bad student. I'm a fast reader or a slow reader, or I'm good or bad at taking standardized tests. These are all narratives that we tell ourselves, and it becomes intertwined with our ego, which is really, really problematic, because what it means is that as you are going through your academic career here, if you hit a stumbling block, if something becomes hard for you, or if you're not getting the results that you want, it becomes evidence to support this narrative. So that if you struggle with something, it's, I am bad at this thing. It's because I am naturally, this is something I'm just bad at. And when you think of it that way, there's not much you can do about it, because it's just who you are. Naturally, you were born that way. And this isn't actually true about learning. Learning is actually a collection of skills and strategies that you have developed over the course of your academic career, starting from when you were 5 years old. And so it feels supernatural and like part of who you are because you started so early. But it's actually something that you have developed over the course of your academic career by crowdsourcing, by watching your peers and your instructors. And just like any crowdsourcing, it's only as good as the crowd you are sourcing from, which means that you may have come into this program with all of the skills that you need to be successful. But if you haven't, that isn't a moral failing. It isn't a problem. It's actually just something that you can reach out for support for. And that's why we exist here at OHSU, is because moving into the programs that we have here is usually materially different from what people have experienced before. And so many people will have come here without the specific skills they need for the environment that they are now in. And we're here to support you with that. And so if you can go to the next slide, specifically what we help you do is help you understand, first of all, help you identify what you want to learn, and then how you were going to learn it, figure out what strategies you were going to use. And then we also help a lot with like when you are going to learn it, in terms of like creating a schedule, creating structure so that you are getting things done. Because depending on your program, some programs are highly structured, and so it's more it's more a case of figuring out how to fit your learning needs within a very busy work or research schedule, or it's you have so much time and then time just sort of slips away, and so you need to have more structure so that you actually get things done. So we work, as it says on the slide, we work with students to help you find personalized, concrete, realistic, and specific strategies. And I think a really important part of this is this whole idea of what we do is to understand that there isn't a right way to do this. There isn't like, you're not going to come and talk to me or to my coworker, Annie Nicholson, who's the other learning specialist here. You're not going to come to us and have us say, oh, you're doing it all wrong. This is what you ought to be doing. it doesn't work like that. It's about figuring out what works for you personally, which means that you may see some of your colleagues and peers using strategies that you've tried before and they don't work for you. And this isn't, and they're working really well for them. And so this isn't like, oh, you ought to be doing that. Like if a strategy doesn't work for you, don't do it. Like do something that does work for you. And so it's very much working with us is very much helping you figure out what of the many, many strategies could work for you personally. So if we go to the next slide, how we support learners are we do a combination of one-on-one appointments and workshops like we have, what, sort of like what I'm doing right now. So one-on-one appointments is you come and meet with us and we figure out what's going on for you personally. In terms of major workshops, if your group wants to request them, we do one about test taking strategies and test preparation. We do one that is more about like time management, focus, and getting the most out of lecture. So we would talk in depth about that previewing strategy that kite exercise was talking about. We also do workshops on reading, group work, exam anxiety. NCLEX is specifically the nursing certification exam, but if you have certification exams or board exams you have to pass, then we help with those as well. The next slide. If you do want to reach out to us for support, you can reach out to us at learningsupport@ohsu.edu. And that's it for me. Should we hold questions to the end, Chennettée, or should we have a pause here for questions?
We can pause here for questions. Then they don't have to hold the learning support questions all the way through.
Sounds good. So does anybody have any questions for me? Are these like holiday hands? Like they're like wearing green gloves. It's really cute. That is an excellent question. Yes, we do. I think I lost connectivity there for a second. I can really quickly show you all how to find the information on Sakai. I'm gonna steal sharing from you really quickly. There are red gloves too. Okay, can you all see this okay? So if you log into Sakai, then your welcome page looks like this. Up at the top will be your classes, any coursework that you're involved in. If you click this red button, Student Academic Support Services, that takes you to our Sakai site. And the first page just explains how to make an appointment with us. So if you forget the email address, you can always come here to find it again. But over here on the left-hand side, we have self-service learning support tools. So if you wanted to learn more about reading strategies, for example, you click it and it takes you through some of our major strategies relating to reading strategies. And then we have, exam taking, memory techniques, all sorts of things. And we also have downloadable planners and whatnot. So you're totally welcome to explore this anytime you like. Let me see if I can. Oh yes, of course. Please share information. And if anybody wants to have, I'm sure Chennettée has this as well, but we have advertising slides that can be included in PowerPoint presentations as well. So if that is something that you wanted to include that way, then you could reach out to us and we can share those with you. All right, well, I'm handing it over to you, Chennettée. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. Well, so I work in the Office for Student Access. So we are the office that provides academic accommodations for disabilities. And I like to emphasize it's not only for permanent disabilities, but temporary. I think that sometimes doesn't always get communicated. So not that we want any of our students to have accidents or anything, but if you get a concussion or, sprain an ankle or, break a bone, we can help with those temporary accommodations as well. So definitely know there's supports for that. In terms of like what is a disability? I think a lot of times I'll have students ask for like a list of all the disability diagnoses we accommodate. But what we actually do is we use the ADA definition of disability, which is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So that is a very, very broad definition. And some major life activities can include caring for oneself, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking. It is really, there's a never-ending list of what major life activities might be. So I think it's really important to understand if you're experiencing a barrier due to like a diagnosis, please reach out to us. That we likely are able to come up with some accommodation to assist. In terms of like what are reasonable accommodations, often we talk about there are barriers in environments. I really like this illustration because there are barriers in lots of areas. It could be a physical barrier, it could be maybe how you learn if you have like a learning disability or ADHD. Because academia is structured in a very specific way, usually for specific types of learners. And so there can be barriers to that. So what accommodations do is kind of level the playing field. So by like reducing the impact of those barriers. So that middle image there. I think one thing we're seeing more is more universal design for learning being incorporated. So this idea that all learners of all abilities would be able to participate in their academics without even needing an accommodation because it's already built to be accessible. So right now, because we're not quite to the overall universal design, our office is here to help with that, with those accommodations to help reduce those barriers. A big thing is I like to talk a lot about what accommodations are and are not, because I think there can a lot of times be some stigma around requesting accommodations and the idea that it's kind of special treatment, which accommodations are not. They are there to level the playing field. They're there to mitigate any impacts of symptoms. They don't lower academic standards. They don't get rid of requirements. They're just there to kind of help bridge the gap between the way you learn and how your like course, your program is structured. So a big thing is it's not special treatment. If you have a disability, it is your legal right to accommodation. So I always want students to be aware that you do have rights and protections, and we want to make sure that you assert those. Some common accommodations, I think our most common is testing accommodations, and that usually includes like extended testing time, ability to test in an environment with fewer distractions, fewer noises. Some students might find it's more helpful if they can use like technology to dictate exam answers, so we can help with technology needs. So there's really all sorts of testing accommodations. Assistive technology is another one. So this can be, I find we work a lot with Emily's office in helping students understand like what their learning style is. So if you're more of an auditory learner versus a visual learner, sometimes being able to listen to your textbooks can be really, really helpful. And that's something our office can help with. Um, if you need materials in different formats or schedule modifications or urban ergonomic furniture, Really, we provide accommodations in all areas related to your academic program. So if you have required internships or practicums, anything like that, again, we assist with that. This is definitely not an exhaustive list of accommodations. Um, Basically, we meet with students and figure out what those barriers are. And there are times we create accommodations because it's a new situation. And so we're really here to kind of brainstorm with you what solutions might be possible. In terms of the accommodation process, it is an interactive process. So the big thing I always tell students is you don't just show up and say, here's my documentation, I have ADHD, tell me what accommodations I'm eligible for. It is a customized process. One student with ADHD may need one set of accommodations, whereas another student may need a completely different set. It's very much customized to your specific learning needs and your specific like barriers that you're experiencing. So it is an interactive process. You would meet with us and we would determine what accommodations you're eligible for, and then you'll get an accommodation letter. And I think the big thing I always want students to know, that accommodation letter doesn't list any disability diagnosis information, doesn't list any symptom information, just lists what your accommodation eligibilities are. So we are really, we find confidentiality is a big thing, especially in health sciences. There's still, again, a lot of stigma around requesting accommodations and discussing disability. And so we really want any disclosures outside of our office to be on your terms. So we want to give you as much autonomy with that as possible. And then you would request your accommodations and work with what we call a PAL or a program accommodation liaison. So you have somebody within your program who is there to help make sure you get your accommodation. So again, we're not going to leave you without support. Once you get that letter, we're still here to support you as well. The big thing I always want students to know as well is we can always update accommodations. So we know symptoms can change and just learning environments change as you get into new rotations or new classes or new learning experiences. Your accommodation needs might change. So we can always update things. And I definitely want you to reach out and let us know if different accommodations are needed. And then in terms of confidentiality, we do, in terms of disability documentation, that is kept within our office. We maintain our own database. And so your registration with our office doesn't become part of your student record. So future schools, future employers won't know you received accommodations while at OHSU unless you tell them. So again, we definitely value your confidentiality and want to make sure that you understand what information is being shared and with whom. We would also only share that you're even eligible for accommodations with people who are part of making sure you get those accommodations. So it's not like anyone at OHSU can just call us up and say, hey, we want a list of every student registered with your office. Unless they have an academic need to know, we do a lot of, I can neither confirm nor deny that student has connected with us. So definitely, again, no, we're protecting your confidentiality as much as possible. And then I also like to highlight there are additional ways we support students beyond accommodations. Accommodations tend to be very individualized and usually reactive. A barrier has presented, a student receives a new diagnosis, and then we kind of react to that barrier. But there are proactive things we can do as well. So we do trainings on anti-ableism and disability inclusion. We do trainings on universal design, so kind of that more proactive building accessible environments. But we also do exploration of assistive technology. I am a big fan of technology because that is something you can take with you. So if you find something is helpful to your learning, it might be helpful in your workplace as well. And technology is often something that translates pretty easily from an academic environment to a workplace environment. So if you're ever interested in exploring that, like definitely let us know. We also assist with applying for accommodations for national exams. So if you have certification, board exam, licensure exams, things like that, while our office wouldn't be able to approve because the exam is outside of OHSU, we can help you with that process. It can definitely be overwhelming sometimes trying to figure out all the ins and outs of requesting those, and we're here to help with that as well. And then for more information about accommodations, links to our appointment request form, documentation guidelines, applications, our main site is ohsu.edu/student-access. And that also has additional resources on there as well. So we have links to national groups for health sciences students with disabilities. We have resources to additional learning resources, disability resources, faculty trainings, all sorts of things there. And if you ever have anything that you come across that you think would be helpful to add, definitely reach out to us. The other thing in terms of our appointment request form, if you're unsure if you might qualify or if you're kind of unsure if you even want to register, we do confidential consultations with students as well. So that would be one way just to kind of get an idea if it might be helpful without kind of starting the official registration process. So definitely reach out to us to find out more. And then we can also be reached at student access at ohsu.edu. Does anybody have any questions about accommodations or accessibility? Anything like that?
Chennettée, this is Andrea.
Mhm.
I have a question. So if a student has an accommodation, is it their responsibility to let their instructor know of the accommodation? Because how does somebody who's teaching the course know?
Yeah, so it is within within this specific program it is. Each program kind of has their um own process. But within the graduate studies programs, it is up to the student to basically pass on their accommodation letter. The big thing is it's also up to students to decide if they want to use their accommodations or not. So especially I find most often like students with testing accommodations, they get into a course where they don't have exams, they might not forward on their letter. So again, we just want as much autonomy for students as possible in deciding who they even let know that they have accommodations, because letting people know you have accommodations also is identifying as having a disability. So again, we want to give as um, much autonomy as possible in choosing to disclose or not. But also, we do let students know there often is a little bit of lead time to coordinate accommodations. So making sure that they are giving enough notice to instructors to their program if they need accommodations as well. So accommodations aren't retroactive. Once that letter is sent out, then they're active. But if like a deadline or a test has passed before they send out the letter, it wouldn't apply to that previous side of things.
Okay, so then it is the student responsibility to let the instructor know. Should they let them know prior to the course beginning if they have the letter before then, or as the course begins, is that still sufficient?
So it depends on how programs are coordinated. In general, I let students know if they can let their faculty know as soon as they have contact info, that gives way more lead time, more ability to coordinate things. I think the longest lead time we have is for like testing. We usually recommend at least 10 business days. So again, depending on how quickly exams are, it can be helpful to do prior to the term starting. But we also do students register throughout the term. We have rolling registration. So a student, again, might have an accident, might have just gotten diagnosed, and so letters could be issued midterm as well.
Okay, And then it was interesting, I think I heard you say they are not retroactive. So if, say, they go through a test and it doesn't work out for them, then they can't present their letter and say, hey, I need accommodations.
Yeah, they can going forward, but it wouldn't mean they can retake the test with
Okay,
time or accommodations. Yeah.
thank you. That was helpful.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. Well, definitely always feel free to reach out. I think the biggest thing, we are here as a resource for both students and faculty and staff. So if you ever have questions, for those of you who are faculty or staff and are like, how do I do this, or how do I make things more accessible? Definitely reach out to us. We are here as an accessibility resource across campus for all members.
We appreciate you coming and providing the information for the students and faculty. It's been very helpful.
Thanks for having us.
We'll do it again, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Feel better, Emily.